Welcome to Across the Aisle. I'm former State Senator Bobby Zirkin, and I just want to welcome you all to another episode. We have a very special guest today, former Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Maryland, Boyd Rutherford. I'm honored to have you here. Boyd, just want to tell you what this is all about. Across the Aisle is about what you're about, which is bipartisan, nonpartisanship, and reaching across the aisle, talking about issues from all angles and trying to kind of explore where to go. And so I can't think of a better guest to have than you. It's an honor to have you here.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad that you asked me. I'm honored to be here. So you give me all these accolades, but no, it's just great to be here.
Well, let's start for those, it's been a couple years now,
almost 4.
Yeah, I've been out, it's like an eternity in politics to be out. They forget your name very quickly.
Oh, yes.
You were the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't remember your story, take us from how you got there and back where you were before that, and then also, kind of where you're at now.
Okay. Before that time, I was practicing law. I was doing, kind of procurement law and then some advisory work, in kind of government affairs types of things. I had worked in the Ehrlich administration. I was the Secretary of General Services there. And that's where I got to be, I'd say, friends with Larry Hogan, who was the appointment secretary. So he was the one who, brought me in. Well, it was really Steve Krusevsky brought me in, but I had to work with Larry to get settled and then get our people in the department. But we developed a friendship during that time. We would go to cabinet meetings, often sit beside each other and complain about everybody else. I guess it was 2 grumpy old men. And in the years after that, we stayed in contact. We entertained together. Our families entertained together. So we have and had a friendship. And so it's interesting. I've told this story before. I guess it was, when was it? 2013, Larry was doing all these things that looked like he was going to run for governor. And he had this, what did he call it, autumn or fall festival or autumn something festival. It was at the same time as the Republican state convention. And he asked me to be the MC. And so I was the MC, and Lynn Lazarus came, was there, and he's smiling. And he's like, Larry's going to run. And I said, I don't know if I don't know what he's going to do. He hadn't told me. And so then later, probably in December, because it was around the holiday period, I got a call from Senator Marty Madden, who was my state senator. And I don't know if he was still in office at the time, but he called and he said, are you able to meet me for coffee? I have something very serious to talk to you about that has political implications. And so I said, okay, yeah, we can do that. And I got off the phone. I said to my wife, I said, I hope he's not going to ask me to run for lieutenant governor with Larry Hogan. So I met with him and he said, well, Larry wants to talk to you about this. And I said, well, why didn't he just call me? He said, no, that's not the way it works because you might say no. So the question is, will you talk to him about it? And I said, okay, yeah, I know how that works, because you're always willing to talk, right? You don't just say, I'm not talking to him about this. So we talked and he took some, there was some convincing because I was like, I don't know, and you're also thinking you're building a practice of law.
Right.
Because I had been in government, so I'm coming out of government, came out. And
Did you have your own practice or you were working for a firm?
I was affiliated with a firm out of Virginia. I was kind of the Maryland person.
Got it.
So I was building something. And I'm like, this is a state that the Democrats dominate. Am I going to get a backlash, from, folks not wanting to deal with me? And so I thought about it and, talked to the family. The kids who were out of high school, out of grade school at that point, they were all positive. They were like, yeah, you need to do it. My wife, who's more of a private person, was like, well, I don't know. And it became, if you want to, that kind of thing. And so I called Larry back and they wanted to know like within a week. And I called Larry back and I said, I need a few more days. And he's like, well, we want to make this announcement. What the plan was is that Larry was going to announce on 1 week, and then a week later he would announce me as the running mate.
Okay.
He said, we want to make the announcement on this certain date, and if you don't accept, we have to go through the process again. You're the only choice at this point, And I'm like, okay, well. Now, I never went back to him when he was, on medications for his cancer treatment to really ask him the question, like truth serum. Was I really your first choice or only choice? I never went back, but
that's what I hear. I hear you were the only choice, that he wanted you.
So
he's sticking to that story.
He's sticking to it. Well, good for him. So I did agree, and you've gone through and had gone through that. This was the first time I'd ever run for office. So
that was your first time ever running.
Office. Yeah, and so I did not know what to expect, and it was actually a lot of fun. During that time, I felt it was fun. It was tiring, but it was fun. And afterwards, definitely. And a lot of it was because we were the underdogs. No one expected us to win.
You were the underdogs in the primary too.
In the primary too. Yeah.
It was Jim Harkins. Who was it that you were running against? The county executive from Hartford County.
Yeah, it wasn't Harkins.
Not Harkins.
I pictures. I'm sorry, and
That's okay.
I have to apologize to him because
it was not Jim. Anyway.
Yeah, it'll come to me. But he was kind of the odds-on favorite.
Right. And then Anthony Brown after that.
And then Brown after that. So when we won the primary, and Anthony had said something like, for him, the primary was climbing the mountain. All we have left is a molehill, referring to us. And so I think he didn't take us as seriously as he should have. May or may not have made a difference because we were running against, Martin O'Malley.
Right.
That was it. We were running against Martin. It was O'Malley Brown. It wasn't Anthony Brown. And I think we outworked them because we would go to every parade, every festival, either we go together or we're splitting off. We'd meet with any groups, large groups or 6 guys on the corner. It was just, we were out all the time. And I would say to my wife, there's a parade this weekend. And she said, or there's this going this weekend. She said, another parade? What holiday is this? Another festival?
There's always something to do on the campaign trail.
Yeah, barbecue festival.
I loved it. I loved campaigning. I loved door knocking and.
Yeah, we even did some. Larry didn't do any of this. I did some door knocking in Howard County. Just knocking. Hey, I'm Boyd Rutherford. I'm running with Larry Hogan, Lieutenant Governor. Did some of that. Standing out in the rain. We had our rain tax umbrellas.
Right.
And it was in the rain with a rain tax umbrella, knocking on doors, and so
it was clever. That was for sure.
Yeah, that was good. It caught.
I used to my campaign apparatus. Not to dig too deep into campaigns because we have a lot of really important stuff to also talk about from today. But I used to my campaign staff, very sophisticated, and here are the Democratic voters, and here's the super Democratic voters, and here's the likely voters, and all these things. Right. And they would give me these lists. I'm like, I'm not taking any lists. I don't need any of that. I'm knocking on every single door. I knocked on. I had enough time. I was young, single at the time when I first ran, and
what else did you have?
I had nothing else to do. I was still in law school. I had packed all my classes into 1 day a week, and I knocked on doors for the other 6. And from morning till night. And I just said, I'm knocking on every single door. So whether they were registered to vote or not, whether they were Democrat, Republican, Independent, it made no difference to me whatsoever. I just went door to door to door to door. I never skipped a door. And if they weren't registered to vote, I said, I'll send you a registration. If we registered some number of people, and the Republicans who I knocked on their doors, they're like, what are you doing here? We never get Democrats vote, coming here. I said, if I win, I'm representing the whole district. It will make no difference to me whatsoever what party somebody is in. So I'm going to listen to everybody's view. That was my view. I started that right from the start when I was 25.
Well, that was good because I've seen people come to the door and they're looking at a list. They're looking at the list when they're knocking, and particularly now with your doorbell ring cameras.
Right.
You see them looking at the list because my wife is registered. Well, she's now registered independent, but she had long been a registered Democrat, and so they're knocking on the door to Democrats to get her. Republicans are looking to get me, and it's like, shouldn't you just be knocking on the door?
Right.
But it's because
Takes a lot of time,
Yeah,
but
it takes a lot of time. It's just that data.
there were some neighborhoods though where it was like a house every half an acre. I'm like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
this is exhausting.
Right. Townhouse communities are much easier.
Much easier. I stuck to those as much as I
Same
can.
thing with Halloween.
Right. All right. Well, let's fast forward. You became lieutenant governor.
Yep.
Spent 8 years with Governor Hogan. Decided not to run for governor, although
Right.
I know there was a lot of people who wanted you to.
Yeah. I get blamed today. When people are complaining, there are a couple of people, they're friends usually, that are, if they're complaining about something in Annapolis, they say,
It's your fault. Right.
But
I
they
get
would have
that.
been complaining
I get that
against me.
too, which is strange because I was just one of a lot of people down there. But anyway, right now, you and Larry, in my opinion, ran and governed as complete nonpartisans. Like it didn't make any difference whether the idea came from the right, from the left, from the Democrats, Republicans. Like the idea, like you and I shared this view, and we've talked about it many times, that good and bad ideas come from both sides of the aisle, and the aisle really is completely meaningless. And so fast forward till today. I'm fascinated by something that you're involved in right now, which is a lawsuit against the state of Maryland. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to be writing about this in some of my editorials. Can you talk about it? Tell everybody what this is all about.
Yeah, the lawsuit is titled Bryson versus Moore. The governor is listed as a defendant in his official capacity. It's against the administration, but also the Board of Elections. With regard to the ability of right now unaffiliated voters cannot vote in party primaries. Now, for most people, the thought process would be, well, of course, they're not a member of the party, so they can't vote in those primaries. Well, what has occurred, and I'll get to the constitutional issue in a moment, what has occurred is that most primaries in this state are outcome determinative. They determine who's going to be the winner in the general election. We're sitting now in Baltimore City. The Democratic primary in Baltimore City determines who's going to be the mayor, who's going to be the council members. The same for Prince George's County. The same for Carroll County in terms of county commissioners. County commissioners in St. Mary's County is determined in the primary. They are Republicans. Carroll, St. Mary's, Hartford County, for the most part, are Republicans. But in strong Democratic districts, it's determined in the primary. So you have nearly 25% of those who are registered to vote in this state who do not have an opportunity to participate in that portion and selecting who's going to represent them in the highest offices in their jurisdictions, either their county or in the city. Now,
or the state legislatures.
And the state legislature. And, a lot of it, when it comes to the legislative districts, it's primarily due to gerrymandering. That the politicians have created districts that make for safe districts for themselves, large districts or smaller districts for themselves and the party, and funnel the minority firm into smaller districts, or I should say larger districts. They'll extend it a little bit so that they, this is a safe Republican district, these are safe Democratic districts, and and so it locks in a sense of duopoly of the two parties. Now, there's been a growing segment of not just Maryland voters, but voters across the country that are saying, look, I'm a pox on both houses. I don't want to be a part of this party structure. Going back to George Washington and John Adams, they were very concerned about the party structure. They called it factions.
Right.
That were being created, that were more interested in their factions than the good of the entire, fledgling democracy. Now, Maryland, unlike, the U.S. Constitution, has a provision that guarantees the right to vote. Article 1, Section 1, the first section of our Constitution, sets out the requirements for voting. that you have to be a citizen of the United States, a resident of the state of Maryland, and reach the age of 18 by the time of the general election. If you meet those criteria, you have a right to vote in all elections
Yes.
held in the state. There was at the time, Court of Appeals case. They now call it the Supreme Court. I still got an old timer. I still say Court of Appeals. That said that primaries, the Constitution in Article 1 applies to primaries. And so our argument is that, unaffiliated voters should and do have at least a constitutional right to vote in the primaries. It's a fundamental right to vote. And Article 1 basically says it's a fundamental right. The Declaration of Rights in one of the provisions there talks about the fundamental right of voting and that sovereignty is extremely important. Not sovereignty, suffrage. The right of suffrage is extremely important. So that's the case we're bringing. There's case law that is not friendly to us. We think it can be distinguished. And if we do reach the Supreme Court, which I anticipate we will.
Supreme Court of Maryland.
The Supreme Court of Maryland, right. The federal courts have not been as sympathetic with this argument. They have kind of left it to the states.
Right.
So if you already allow what are called open primaries, unaffiliated or independents, or have a top 2 or top 4 type of, then they will give the discretion to the state to say, fine, you can do that. There's no challenge. If it's the other way, like Maryland, that is a closed primary state, and we are one of now a minority of states that are actually closed primaries.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The majority of states are now open?
Our neighbor, Virginia is an open primary state. So many states, we're talking about Michigan. Michigan's an open primary state. And so a lot of the jurisdictions are open primary. The party structure doesn't like that because more and more people are leaving the party structures. And they are saying, well, this year I like that candidate who happens to be running under the Democratic banner. And they may be, say, I saw an article, I guess, a couple of days ago in The Sun, and there was a woman who testified about the redistricting measures and constitutional change. And she said she's an independent, but she leans Democrat. So that same person might decide that she doesn't like the people on the Democratic primary, listing, but she does like one person on the Republican listing and decides I'm going to vote the Republican because I feel, as she would say in her mind, I vote for who I think is the best person.
Right.
And that's what a lot of states do.
So let me ask you I want to continue to talk about the kind of the nitty gritty of the law and how you think that this plays out. Because I know some of these cases, Sussman v. Lamone, for example, which I do want to talk about, because that, we've really had some bad cases in Maryland. That one is as bad as it gets. I tried when I was in the General Assembly to undo that because that was about judicial elections, which are supposed to be nonpartisan.
And they called it partisan. And they ruled it was a partisan election.
Like semi-partisan or whatever the language is. I feel like that they wanted the General Assembly to. That's a great example because. Essentially what we're talking about here, for those who don't understand, is like the judicial elections for circuit court judge are often determined in the primary. Not that because they're running as a Democrat or Republican, but if you win both the Democrat and Republican primaries, the election's over. Right. And there is no general election. And so all the independent, unaffiliated voters are completely disenfranchised because they have no opportunity to participate at all in a lot of the elections.
Right.
And so...
And let me just add to that.
Radically unconstitutional, in my opinion.
As we keep jumping on the Sussman v. Lamone, is that if you were an unaffiliated, a person who registered to vote as unaffiliated with a party, and the governor decided to appoint you to be a circuit court judge, you met all the qualifications, when your name pops up the next year for the retention election, your name is going to be on the Republican and it's going to be on the Democratic primary ballot. You can't vote for yourself.
You can't vote for yourself.
Right. So that's about as ridiculous as it could be. And Judge Bell, at the time, he objected to that, as well as the fact that they called it a partisan election.
I feel like they wanted us, and I always said this, I'm not 100% sure I was saying it correctly, but I assumed from some of the language in Sussman v. Lamone that they were asking the General Assembly to fix it
Right.
and to make this right. And the General Assembly wouldn't fix it. And the reason they wouldn't fix it is because there was a certain faction of folks who didn't think judges should be elected. I actually was one of those people who didn't think that judges should go through election for a host of reasons. But I always said, if you're going to keep these elections, you have to fix it and make sure everybody can vote.
Right.
But then they got into the, well, should they all have to just run in the general? Is there going to be the type of thing where you send a couple through? You know, how does it work? What are the numbers and so forth? And everybody had their own ideas, and nobody could get a majority on it. And so every single year, despite the fact that people understood that independents should have a right to participate, at least in the judicial elections, it never got fixed. And it still isn't fixed to this day.
No, it's not. It's not. And so I was going to say, if, when we get to the Supreme Court, we would be asking them to overturn Sussman as well as Hennigan in 1946 case that Sussman followed in certain respects. So, the times have changed significantly from even when Sussman was decided. At that time, there were about 400,000 registered voters who had registered as unaffiliated. At this time, it's about 1 million, and so from that time frame, about, I think, less than 20 years ago, it has more than doubled in terms of the amount of people who have chosen to leave the party.
It's going to get worse too. I mean, no, I'm sorry. I don't mean to say it like that. It's going to get, in some ways, I think it's going to get better. I think the more people that are willing to say, I am not affiliated with this party or that party, and I'm not going to follow them like blind lemmings. Like, I just think that's a good thing for the democracy. But, it's interesting. I did a podcast with Stuart Pittman, chairman of the Democratic Party, and we were talking about this, and we talked about your lawsuit a little bit, but we were talking more about the policy of it. And he said, well, that in the law, both state and federal, there's essentially has created this this two-party system. I said, of course they created the two-party system. They have the votes, and so they created, so they have put into law their own power structure.
Exactly.
That bodes that means nothing, right? Of course they're gonna. I mean, the General Assembly, and not to veer too far off, but I think redistricting and what just happened in Annapolis lends even more importance to your lawsuit, because now, and it's not, I look at the Democrats and what they did here, and I'm not pleased with it, because I think it's the wrong principled moral thing to do. And I think many of them feel that way too. But then you look at Texas and other states who have also done the wrong thing, the unprincipled and immoral thing. But state by state, one party is now giving themselves legally power. And they are, not only are they disenfranchising independents and unaffiliated, they're disenfranchising the other party.
The other party, yeah. And, well, I don't know who was the first person to say this, that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that is, I mean, we were all raised as kids that two wrongs don't make a right, and if your friend jumps off a bridge, you're going to jump off a bridge too. Well, if it looks like fun, maybe, but no. But it's, those were the things that you were taught, that you, just because someone else is doing it. And what makes you different than, if the big argument is we need to stop Donald Trump, what makes you different from Donald Trump? You're just doing the same thing,
right?
And you can't. I would argue that you can't go lower than Donald Trump. He sets a bar low. Why would you want to go that low?
Right. I understand the argument as to why Maryland did that, because, I was really proud that they were standing strong. Bill Ferguson in particular was putting his body up against the waves.
Right.
And, he did something which I thought was really brilliant, which is he got together with Indiana, who was also trying to stand against, against the tide, from the other side, from the Republican side, because the Senate president there also didn't think that this was the right thing to do. And they were standing up against both the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment, who were demanding that they do this. And so they formed a union together, and said, we're not going to do this together. We're going to say no together. That way you don't have this argument about the numbers game.
Right.
And then as soon as the election happened, Donald Trump went and unelected all the people who didn't bend the knee to him in Indiana, and down went Indiana. So down went that argument for Maryland. And so Bill was left a little bit high and dry because he tried to kind of undercut the argument that people were making, and then Trump undercut that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of blame to go around here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, so we'll see what happens, but I am hopeful that we will succeed in court, because I think that's a small step of, trying to bring some sanity back to the people who we elect. I think most people probably would like to reach a point, particularly when it comes to federal elections, that they're voting for people versus against people.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
And so I think that if you allow the unaffiliated, those are people who are probably less partisan, just by their decision to get out of the partisan rat race. They're less partisan. They're more likely to have views that are, and I use the term moderate, but meaning more so that they're willing to compromise. And what we found, and I'd say it starts with the gerrymandering, is you get people who are not willing to compromise, or they feel they can't, to hold on to their jobs. Because if you're a Democrat, you're looking over your left shoulder because there's someone that may, you don't vote a certain way, that there's going to be a challenge on your left. If you're a Republican, you're looking over your right shoulder. Indiana's a very good example of that, what you just mentioned, that someone's going to challenge you from the right. And so having, that same candidate have to think about, well, 25% of my constituents are not partisans.
Right.
I still have to appeal to them too. That's a large block that I have to be concerned about. And the partisan blocks are getting smaller because, every year you're seeing less members of both of the major parties and more people who are unaffiliated, and a small group that may go to Green or one of the other, parties.
So let me ask you this from a practical standpoint, because I've had conversations with some of my former colleagues down in Annapolis, and one of them in particular, and I had a, pretty, I don't think stern discussion, but I shared my views about what my friends, I won't say who it is, but current senator said about, they agreed with what you and I are talking about, which is unaffiliated should be able to participate, but they said that they should essentially be forced into one of the two major parties in order to participate. And I said that is an outrage, in my opinion, that these are private organizations. The Democrat and Republicans are private organizations, and that you are, by doing that, you're not doing the right thing, that you are saying that in order to avail yourself of a constitutionally protected right, the most fundamental one in a democracy, that you have to be a part of us.
Yeah, you have to be a member of a club.
Our club, our gang, in order to do it. And I said, that's wrong. So let me just ask the general question. If your lawsuit is successful, if the Court of Special Appeals, the Appellate Court of Maryland, they changed their name too.
Right.
If the Appellate Court of Maryland says, we agree with you, we're siding with the plaintiffs in this matter, what is the practical effect of that? What, aside from there being a challenge to the Supreme Court, but at the end of it, what happens to the law if you're successful with this?
Okay. Yeah, getting past the whole procedural, because it sends it back down to the trial court, all that kind of stuff. But it basically takes the argument away from the defendants if it goes to the trial court. So, but in any event, if it holds up, then, because what we're really saying is, look, the private parties can have their own primaries. It's just the state can't pay for it because by doing that, they're supporting the discrimination against unaffiliated voters. They are basically saying 25% of those who've registered to vote, that their constitutional right to participate in all elections has been denied, and the state can't do that and still pay for it. So
and that's tens of millions of dollars, right?
Yes, yes. So the parties can pay for their own primaries, because the way the statute says that the principal parties, which is the Democratic and Republican Party, they don't name it that way. It's the party of the governor and the second place party, the party of the person who came in second place. So it would be interesting if you had an unaffiliated person run for governor and come in second.
Yeah.
They would be, under the statute, unaffiliated would be a party, which right now it's not.
Right.
It's just a bunch
What
of
would
people.
happen then?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think the legislature would have to step into it, because there would be a real question of who is then the minority principal party under the statute, because there wouldn't be one.
Right.
But in any event,
Wait.
No,
Before we move off that for a second,
I see your mind just
I mean, if
going.
you think about that for a second, because it is very reasonable that an unaffiliated, an independent could win the governorship
Yeah.
or come in second. So let's say I'm
Right,
going to throw a name out
what
here.
was the wrestler in Minnesota?
Jesse the Body Ventura.
There you go.
Jesse the Body. If you had like an Alan Kittleman, for example, run for governor,
Right.
and he's not saying he's going to, although I think he'd be a great one.
I think there would be a chance that Alan could come in second.
For sure. And if he
Yeah.
came in second, would that mean that whoever came in third, let's say the Republican
Right.
came in third, so would they now not have their next primary paid for? Would they be canned out of the process because of that
would be-
statute?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because they would probably would have to petition to get on the primary ballot, to have a primary ballot.
That's what makes this
Yeah,
whole thing
it's-
ridiculous
right.
and unconstitutional, in my
Because
opinion.
right now, as primary or as principal parties, they don't have to petition to get on the ballot. They get ballots.
Right.
The Republicans get a ballot, and these guys get a ballot.
Wow.
So, that's interesting.
And
Yeah.
does unaffiliated now have the right to have a primary as a quote party, because unaffiliated was the
Right.
was the second, the one who
They
came in second.
Right.
That's not an unrealistic. This is not like some
because of the
hypothetical.
way the statute is set up, the assumption was that you had the two parties, and it's always going to be those two parties. One's going to be majority, one's going to be the minority principal parties. So yeah, that's a very good point. But
Back to the question.
Back to the
What
question.
happens when you win this?
the simplest thing for the parties to do, if they don't want to pay for their own primaries, would be to allow unaffiliated voters to vote in their party primaries, which
In
they
their
can do
party primary.
in their party primaries. Each one would have to do that. Now, the Republicans did that. I don't remember the year, but it was like 20 plus years ago. The Republicans did it for one cycle. I think Michael Steele was the chair of the party. They did it for one cycle. It was before Facebook and the internet, or the internet really taking off. So there was not much publicity about it. It would have allowed or did allow unaffiliated or independent voters to vote in the party primary. It happened one time, it ended. The statute does say that the parties, by notifying the Board of Elections that they would be allowing unaffiliated voters to vote in their primary, that would really take care of it right there. The legislature could come in and change that to say that we now have open primaries. It's possible that the Board of Elections can do it. I haven't looked at their regulations to see if they could just put it in as a regulation to say we no longer are requiring you to register with a party, which is Virginia and a number of other states. When you register to vote, you register to vote. You don't register as a party.
Is that right?
Right.
So when you go into the motor vehicles or wherever they register people to vote, you don't have to check. You don't check off.
You don't check a party. Right.
That's the way it should be.
Right. So you're a registered voter. And so if there is a primary, and see, you may have heard, and sometimes Virginia will have the parties will have a convention to nominate their person. They have that option to do a convention to nominate. The smaller parties, minority parties in Maryland, not the Democrats and Republicans, they have the option of doing conventions to nominate who they want as the Green Party candidate or the Libertarians. So
I don't understand. So as a candidate, you have to say Governor Spanberger, she went through a She went through a primary, I assume.
No, she did not. She did
Tell me
not.
how the.
I
See, I don't
don't,
understand.
and I haven't
I'm
studied
going to give you a system that I love because I'm
I know.
intrigued
We'll
by
get
all
there.
the different systems that are
Yeah,
out there. But like,
I haven't studied Virginia. I've only from afar looked, but I haven't really delved into it. The last governor's race, because there were no candidates in either party there was only one candidate in both parties that had signed up to run, that they did not have primaries.
oh, okay.
Spanberger didn't have one, and I forgot her name, the former lieutenant governor.
They didn't even have some random person that ran against them. Nothing.
Yeah. In
Zero.
Maryland, you'd have a random person, but no one ran. No one signed up. There was one. I know on the Republican side, there was at least a state senator, I think, who threatened to, and then she backed out. Maybe the party structure said, hold your fire, but.
And so there was no primary.
They didn't have a primary. They just
So in a
sense, you save money.
Right.
We would have a primary with one person on the ballot.
Right, and spend tens of millions of dollars all across the state of Maryland, but just for those two. Here's my concern. So and this is a policy argument, maybe more than a legal one, but I do think I get what the statute says, but you talked about what the Constitution says in Maryland,
right?
And it seems like that's a fundamental right and that's
what we argue.
Yeah. And it's a fundamental right also to have the freedom of association that I can't be forced into in order to avail myself of one constitutional right that I abridge my other one. Like I have freedom to associate with whoever I want to, and I have the right to vote, and I have freedom not to associate. And so the idea that this could be fixed by allowing, as if like it's some, grand gesture, permitting you may participate with us in order to avail yourself of a right, I think is wrong as it is right now.
I agree.
I think also, I should be allowed to vote for whoever I want to in a preliminary election. I don't even want to call it a party primary because, like you said, the founding fathers never wanted this to be the way it was. They warned specifically against this. They warned against factions, like you said. I'm not even sure they envisioned that the factions that they were concerned about would put into law their own power and legally keep people from availing themselves of the most fundamental democratic right. So here's my solution. I'm curious your thoughts. I think the state of Alaska has this right. I think they have as perfect of a system as you can ask for. They have an open primary. Every candidate has to run, because I could never stand the idea that I went through a primary and then somebody could just stick their name in the general anyway, so they didn't have to bother going through it. So like every candidate has to run, and every person can vote. Every single person that meets the criteria, age and citizenship and all those other things can vote, and you vote for whoever you want. If I like the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate or the purple candidate or whatever, I decide who I vote for because that's my right as an American. And they send 4 people out to the general, regardless of what party. You could have 4 Democrat candidates, 4 Republicans, 4 independent, it doesn't matter. Top 4 vote getters go through. So you have a range of candidates that go to the general. So you don't have this kind of like left-wing crazy versus right-wing crazy in general elections. You get 4 choices. And then they do that ranked choice voting up there so that I get to say, all right, I like person A, but if person A doesn't win, I like person B. And if person B doesn't win, I like person C. And person D, can't stand that person. They're my number 4. And in that system, can
you leave number 4 off?
You can do whatever you want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you have the right to do whatever you want.
You can just vote 1 if you want it.
You can just vote 1 if you want to, in which case, if your person, the way that it works is somebody has to get 50% after the general. And so if I go, if I rank 1, 2, 3, and 4, if my person 1 gets eliminated because they, after all the votes are tallied, person 1 came in 4th place. That's my guy, but he got crushed.
Right.
Whoever I voted for number 2 then gets my vote. Everybody who voted for number 1, their number 2s get dispersed. And it sounds complicated, but it's actually quite simple. And what happens is, first of all, candidates can't be, the jerks and divisive figures that they are in most of America right now, because if you infuriate everybody else's voters,
Right.
You're going to lose. And so it really creates more civility among the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
But then it also creates more moderation, because the fringe lunatics, like this clown from Michigan, El Said, and I shouldn't say clown. He's not a clown. He's actually quite dangerous because he's smart, but he is a fringe. I mean, he would never win in that type of a system. He might get 30% or 25%, but nobody else is putting him as number two. Number two would get dispersed among the more moderate centrist, quote, normal candidates, not the ones that want to, I don't know, I can't even, like, they want to do away with the U.S. Senate and do away with prisons and open borders and all this other crazy stuff that this guy spouts. He could never win in that system.
Right.
That's my argument, is that from a policy perspective, that we shouldn't force, and I hope, so back to the question to you.
And that would be up to the legislature, really. I mean,
could the court fashion that? Would the court have the legal right to fashion it? Could they say open primary is the only fundamental, there's the only way to do it?
They could probably go to, say, well, what we would be asking, in our case, we're saying, look, we think the legislature, the governor, the board of elections are smart enough to figure this out. They just can't pay for it. So it would be that, okay, and if the parties say, we don't want to pay for it, the easiest way would be to allow unaffiliated to come in and vote. And so you'd still have the existing system. We're not blowing up the system.
Your lawsuit's not trying to blow up the system.
Right. We're not blowing the existing
I'm trying to blow up the system.
You're more blowing it up.
I want to blow the system up.
So, and I would, sound like a judge or whatever, is that would be the legislature to decide that, that if they decided. And, our referendum process is not as simple as some other states. Many other states that have referendums, California in particular, it is something, you get a certain amount of petitions and you can get this question on the ballot. And what often happens in California, and I lived in California for many years, is that you get your petition, your issue on the ballot, but the other side puts something on the ballot that is contrary to your issue. And in some cases, the language sounds very similar and they both win. And so nothing happens.
Right.
Basically, it just stays the same because nothing happened. But at least you can get something, an initiative process going if you get enough people that are willing to, put their name to something.
We couldn't do that here, though.
And Alaska may have gone through an initiative process.
That's what happened.
To get there.
Yeah. That's how they got there.
Right. And I think you could see that if you had that ability here, but we don't at this point. It's like the legislature has to allow something to go to the ballot.
But they'll never do that.
No, they protect themselves.
They'll protect their own parties and their own power and their own, and that's asking a lot for the legislature to essentially blow up a system that got them elected. You're not going to see that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. One of our plaintiffs, who is a member of what is called Independence of Maryland, I probably got the title wrong, but she has testified before the legislature. And one state senator had said, well, if unaffiliated can vote, that means I have to raise more money so I can reach more people. And she was like, well, isn't that your job?
That's your job.
Don't you want to, not the money part, but aren't you trying to reach more people? Because you do represent these people that are living in your district that may not be able to vote for you, but you still represent them.
Well, if you want an additional plaintiff on your case, that's a Democrat that wanted to vote for a Republican in the primary, and that should have been my right. Or if I was an independent and I wanted to vote for a Democrat or a Republican, I shouldn't have to pledge my allegiance to a private organization in order to do that.
Right.
I don't know if that's too far for your lawsuit.
That was a little too far, because we wanted people who the damage was they were prevented from voting because of their status as unaffiliated.
Right. No,
voter.
I get that.
Right. Because we had a lot of people that came to us who they did that switching back and forth.
Right.
They normally, like today, they're probably unaffiliated because they've switched back. But then in 2 years, they'll affiliated with one party or the other because they want to vote this way. So yeah, we had that, and we said, oh, unfortunately, we can't. You can help by writing letters to the editor, and talking to your neighbors, and calling your council person or your state senator or delegate, telling them how you feel about this. I said, but being involved in the suit, just support us on the outside.
I think what would be interesting. I always found it when there was a movement in Annapolis. That's when when people started listening. If the unaffiliateds got together and said, you know what, we're not voting for you unless you pledge that we have the opportunity to vote. I think that is as fun. Like, my wife is an independent now.
Mhm.
She was a Democrat, so she could vote for me in the primary or vote against me. I don't know. Maybe she voted against me.
Maybe.
But if the unaffiliateds got together and said, and there was a campaign to say, you either support this or we're going to vote. We're going to vote for your opponent in the general.
Mhm.
And we got 25% of us, and if you don't pledge and actually follow through with giving us the opportunity to vote, not by joining you, but just having the opportunity to vote in every election, we're going to vote for your opponent.
Well,
We'll
I
support
think
the one who gives us.
the opportunity for doing something like that is with this constitutional amendment. That if unaffiliateds, gather and realize this isn't just an assault against the Republicans. This is also an assault against you, because it's solidifying power in one party.
Yeah.
The power was in two parties, lesser in one party than the other, but it was a duopoly. Now they're just making it a total monopoly.
Yeah.
And you're being left out even more than what you were left out before.
It's true.
And so,
50% of the state,
right.
almost 50% of the state
Yeah.
is being told Big Brother will take care of you,
Right.
basically. The Democrats will take care of you, and you have no opportunity to get your candidates
Right.
elected.
Yeah. I think a sound democracy, if you're going to have a multi-party system, at least to have an opposition party, because it at least keeps the majority on their toes, making sure that they're doing things right, and hopefully if the numbers are close enough, then there's going to be negotiation and there's going to be compromise.
Well, you can see where this is heading just a few steps away. Like, today, it's what we're talking about, but this, and not to get into this conversation too far, but like, if you read the platform of the Democratic Socialists, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you read that, some things in particular would sound like they come from like a bunch of 10-year-olds sitting around thinking about stupid ideas that you could do to change the country. Like, it really sounds like a bunch of 10-year-olds. But if you look a little deeper into some of their ideas, they're very dangerous, and you could see a situation, and it is the next step of acquiring power that then can't be undone.
Right.
Part of their
Totalitarianism.
It's exactly right. They want to get rid of the judiciary,
right.
An independent judiciary branch, by getting rid of the Supreme Court and have it simply appointed by the House, and get rid of the U.S. Senate,
exactly.
and get rid of the presidency. So they want all of this appointed by the House. Well, why?
A Politburo.
That's exactly what it is.
These are folks
that's dangerous,
that
really dangerous.
Either were too young and never learned it in school what the Soviet Union was all about, what the Iron Curtain was, what the totalitarianism was.
Right.
And even go and find, it's hard to find someone. There may be a grandmother out there that lived in Czechoslovakia. Someone that can tell you what it was like to live under communist and so-called socialist, countries, what the incentives were to produce and they didn't produce, how the stores and supermarkets were bare. There was a basketball player, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, and it struck me, former Los Angeles Laker, Vlade Divac. I think he was from Serbia.
Yes.
He came, the Iron Curtain was starting to crumble a little bit, but he came to the Lakers while it was still happening. And this was after he had retired, but he talked about how he talked to his wife, who was still there, on the phone, and said he went to the store to get chocolate. And he said there were all kinds of chocolates. Chocolate raspberry, dark chocolate, light chocolate, chocolate with nuts, with that. He said, at home, you may get chocolate. That was it. So it just
Yeah.
innovation, activity, production that takes place, and how your choices become far more limited. And that is what these folks are talking about, because
Yeah.
they think that this is going to be utopia. But that was the same thought that,
Karl
Lenin
Marx
had, and
right.
Marx.
Right.
They were talking this utopian idea that the people would do these things, not understanding human nature and what ends up happening.
Or economics, basic
And the
economics.
economics,
I mean,
the economics of it is that you just are disincentivizing innovation or even work.
so this is the problem now with it. Back to what we're really talking about, which is the independents having an opportunity to vote. Michigan is a great example. I mean, there's so many examples around the country right now where you have these like fringe candidates being elected in both parties, being elected by a fraction
A fraction of the group.
of the
Right.
electorate,
Right.
because unfortunately people don't come out in primary elections, and the parties have set up a system that whatever it is that those primaries say, those are your two general candidates. And so they get paid for, like you said, and by the states. They are enshrined in law, sometimes in the Constitution, as they're trying to do here in Maryland. And so you end up getting some candidate from the far, far left that most people in the Democratic Party don't like, and then somebody from the far, far right. And so it ends up being like, well, I guess that's my group.
I'm going to support the party nominee, and
Right.
they chastise the other people who are elected that are in another part of the state, have a different constituency, or another part of the country, a different constituency. Are you going to support the nominee if wackadoodle guy becomes the nominee? Are you going to support? I'm going to support the Democrat or Republican nominee. It's like, where's your line? Where's that line to say, no, I'm not going to support that guy.
That's right.
And
you don't have choices.
And you can even say, I don't know if I'm going to vote for the other party's person, but I'm not going to support him or her. That's.
I mean, we've gone crazy when you have. This is a perfect example. This Abdul El Said, who is about as despicable of a candidate as I've ever seen in politics. He is to me, he's the same thing as Louisiana's old David Duke. Grandmaster, to me, they're exactly the same candidate, just new generation. One's, more well-spoken and better looking and all the rest. But at the end of the day, they are one and the same. And Chuck Schumer, who I had a tremendous respect for, is supporting him. There is nothing that Abdul El Said believes that Chuck Schumer agrees with, nor should he, because literally I haven't heard a single thing coming out of Said's mouth that makes either any sense or is not disgusting or is not anti-Semitic. I mean, it is horrifying listening to this guy. It is as big of a demagogue as I've seen since David Duke, and Chuck Schumer is supporting him. I mean, in Maryland, I've come to expect that Chris Van Hollen is going to go support every whack job out there, if it suits his need. I mean, Chris Van Hollen has you don't have to say this. I'm much less reserved than you, but I think Chris Van Hollen has quite earned his nickname, Chris Van Hamas. I mean, that is as good of a nickname as there is out there. So you expect this from him. But Chuck Schumer or, Senator Gillibrand or whatever, or some of these other more just because the guy has a D next to his name.
Right. That's what they're doing. That's exactly it.
This is why your lawsuit is so important. It really is. It's the start of something. It's kind of like the first. I don't want to.
As we, and if we can bring again more attention, and particularly for those who are unaffiliated, to really, start exercising their right, to send letters to their state senator or whatever, if they're invited to a fundraiser, say, well, I'm not giving you any money, because I can't vote in the primary. Why should I support you if you're not going to stand up to work with me?
Right. For my fundamental right.
Right. A fundamental right. It's like, just call me or send me a letter or we'll talk about your issues, blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, you can tell me anything, but I have no ability to remove you if you don't do what you say you're going to do.
Is there a legal argument? And I know this is not your lawsuit, and you don't have to comment on anything I ask you if you don't.
Okay.
I don't want to get you, upside down with anything you're going to be doing in the court. But is there a legal argument for somebody like me, who's a registered Democrat, and I want to stay as a registered Democrat for whatever my reasons are, but I want to vote for somebody else in the preliminary election, in the primary election? Is there a legal argument that says you're forcing me to abridge one fundamental right for another? Like my
Yeah.
freedom to vote is being abridged by my freedom of association.
I think you run into the same challenge that we're being confronted with the cases that, like Sussman, that say you don't have a right to vote in a party primary unless you're a member of that party. Now, we feel the underlying case in that statement was dicta, that it wasn't based on any analysis other than to say this is the way it was always done before there were primaries. And it's like, yeah, before there were primaries, they weren't paid for by the state. The parties paid for it. So then the legislature, who were made up of Democrats and Republicans, said, oh, let's create a party process or a primary process, and we'll have the state pay for it. Yay! So they bailed themselves out.
Yeah.
If there was a competitive governor's race this year, and I know, sorry, Dan Cox, if there was a competitive governor's race, they would probably be spending upwards of $20 million, if not more than that. The parties could pay for their own primaries.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I guess. And is there I don't know, I'm just trying to think through all the different hypotheticals. Like I'm a Democrat. I want to run, and I don't want to participate in the primary election because I'm more of an independent type of a Democrat. I need my voters. They're not allowed to vote for me. I'm going to put my name into the general, which I can do as an independent.
Right.
But I can't go in there and say who I am.
Right.
Why can't I have a D next to my name? Why do they get to say who their person is in an election? Why can't I just say, look, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not participating in an election where 12 people vote. I want to go to the masses because I'm one of these Democrats who says the party doesn't really matter. I'm for everybody. I want to be in the general election, but I want to tell you I'm a Democrat. Why is that not permitted? Why is that they're just a private organization gets to say how I refer to myself on the ballot?
Right.
Paid for by the state and my tax dollars.
Taxation without representation.
There it is. Taxation without representation. That's what my wife said. My wife's independent, as I said, and she says the same thing. I pay taxes. I should have a right to vote, and I shouldn't have to participate with any primary.
Patrick Henry that said that? Who said that? Patrick Henry was one. I only have one life to give for my country, I think. But I forgot who originally said that.
I don't know. I remember, though, in the Federalist Papers, the warnings about what we're talking about. Yeah. That I remember. I can't remember which number it was, but in the Federalist Papers,
Madison talked about the concern about factions. Now, he eventually switched to join with Jefferson, who then kind of was behind a lot of that party faction.
Well, you see what happened. They didn't want it, but it turned out that you needed it in order to get power, in order to consolidate power. And then once they had it, it moved in a different direction. Yeah. That's, like you said, the power corruption is there. And I don't mean corruption isn't taking money. I mean holding on to power.
Right.
By any means. And that means legally putting yourself in the best position of power.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess, we could do this for hours, and I'm really enjoying this. I think this is as fundamental and important of an issue as I'm looking at in Maryland politics and across the country, because in my opinion, and I'll let you comment and then we'll wrap up, but in my opinion, these primary elections have shown the problem, as much as I've ever seen before, where you have fringe, and I mean really fringe candidates, particularly from my party, that are getting elected. I get it, the obsession with Donald Trump, and you can criticize lots of things about him, but he's going to be gone in 2 years, and we're going to be left with some of the. You have candidates that have come out of these primaries who openly, just despise the country, talking about wiping their wiping their feet on the
On the
on the flag,
Right.
or I mean, again, not to give this guy too much airtime, but El Said with his buddy Hassan Piker talking about how 9/11, we deserve 9/11.
Right.
For those of us old enough and who knew people that were in New York and knew people who died on this thing, like, they just trampling on the graves of Americans. And these are people that are getting elected by these
Right.
primary elections. And the independents, I mean, in Michigan, they have the right to vote, but I don't know if they have the right to cross. But if you had a system like Alaska, like I said, you would never be getting these types of fringes.
Right.
But we have got to shake up the electoral system
Yeah.
before it's too late, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. And one of the things, and on the other side, on the Republican side, which I'm still a member, registered voter in the Republicans, is that this is the first time I can remember where you've had a president get this involved with primary elections. I know the party structure themselves, the RNC, the DNC, they typically have rules internally that say we don't get involved in the primaries. But when you have the head of the party, which typically would be the president, they probably can either order directly or just the bully pulpit get involved. And we've saw that to a certain extent with the governor here getting involved in party primaries.
Yeah.
With endorsements. And I really don't remember seeing too much of that
Yeah, no,
previously.
things are changing right now.
Yeah.
Things are changing. And I would say none of it is good.
No, I don't think it
These
is.
changes that are happening are all going in the wrong direction.
Right.
All right. So we could do this, and there's so many different issues to talk about. I hope maybe you'll come back and talk about this as this lawsuit proceeds.
Sure.
I just want to say, on behalf of across the aisle, the people who listen to this podcast, I think everybody is probably shaking their head the entire time in agreement with what it is that you're doing. You've spent a great career both in the private sector and then in public service as our lieutenant governor for 8 years, practicing what you preach, which is nonpartisanship and just caring about issues over party. And that's as much as you can really ask for a public servant. And it was an honor to serve with you for all those years. And I really love what you're doing with this lawsuit. I hope it is successful. It is so important for our democracy.
Thank you.
So
We'll
for
keep
Across
working.
the Aisle, it's been my honor.